Welcome to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. How do we learn to truly thrive together? How do we stay connected to our authentic selves, each other, and our purpose as a team, especially when challenged? How do we unlock the deeper levels of group intelligence? Enjoy this episode of the Connected Teamwork Podcast and learn practical tools to evolve the connectedness of your team to its next level.
Welcome to Connected Teamwork Podcast, episode number 68, where we help leaders and teams connect more deeply to each other and themselves. I'm your host, Hylke Faber, and I'm here together with my co-host, Carson Heady. How are you doing, Carson, today?
Hylke, I'm always great when I'm with you. Thanks for spending this time with me.
Same here. And if you're listening, you are tuned in to Connected Teamwork Podcast. The mission is to bring people more together, both within themselves and with each other. And today we are focusing on the next one of the connected teamwork practices, practice number 7, which is called listen and share courageously. Listen deeply, create dialogue, conflict equals confluence. To me, this practice of listening could be like the practice of all practices. Because to me, I think about any conflict that I'm in with others or with myself. I notice that my mind tends to go this or that, black or white, either this or that, and it keeps to make arguments this or that, and it's unsettling. And we do this either with ourselves or with others. And then when we connect to listen more deeply, our thinking slows down, our breathing becomes deeper, we become more present. Things that seem difficult actually might still have difficulty, and yet they get a quality of simplicity and a sense of insight. This is why part of listening is to start to reframe conflict as confluence, conflict as polarization, and confluence saying we have different opinions, like rivers coming together, and together they make a stronger current. And to get into the current, what I need to do as one of the participants is to listen deeply. What do I really care about? What do they really care about? I'll give a quick example, and then I'm curious to see what you think about listening and how it's helped you as a leader, Carson. I had a conflict with somebody a month ago in the Netherlands, and this person perceived that I wasn't in a particular meeting, very much a team worker. And he was right, because I was in my head and I was trying to drive to an outcome. And this person gave me feedback about that. And the person was quite upset about it. I was driving. And so, of course, my first thing is I'm at the end of the day, I don't want to deal with this. But there was a silent voice in me that says, quieter voice that said, just listen. And said, tell me more about that. And then I played it back. So I see that you were upset because you saw that I talked 60% of the meeting. I didn't check in with you. And then I kept reiterating. Is that what you're saying? And the person said, yes. And so we had a few of this back and forth. And then the anger on the other side dissipated, and he gave me feedback later saying, that was a really powerful conversation for me because you helped me. And to me, that's what listening is. Not that I always do it well. I don't. Ask my husband, ask anybody who's close to me. But when I really listen well, it has a quality of disarmament and service. So, Carson, tell us about your experience with listening.
That's exceptionally powerful. And Hylke, I look up to you a great deal as a grand master of connectedness, and to know that you're continually on this journey. And spending time in reflection and improving in this area motivates and inspires me. This is an area where I believe we are, you mentioned it at the onset of this conversation, it's kind of the principle of all principles, but we're constantly evolving and in flux in this area. And where there have been times when I feel like I've been very effective with listening and leadership, where, you know, I've had new teams or new organizations that I've led, and, you know, rather than coming in and having knee-jerk reactions or making policy changes, it's spending time, you know, with your team in the field, understanding their why, understanding, you know, what projects did they care about before you got there that they want to continue having. You don't want them to feel like they're starting over. You want to make sure that plans and strategies that are put together for the team are collaborative and not just me dictating. But on the same token, there are areas where I continue to try to evolve and get better. There were some concepts that really resonated with what you just shared, and kind of that say more. I've often been a person and leader, and sometimes husband and parent, who tries to diagnose or fix or be the problem solver. It isn't what people are looking for as often as we may think. Sometimes they're not looking for their problem to be solved. They're looking for someone to listen, to empathize, to sit in the storm with them, as opposed to being the hero. And I found more often than not, especially in my advancing age, and you know, the more therapy that I do, that often it's more critically important that, you know, we get over sometimes our own insecurities in those situations, right? I've often felt like I had pressure on me to be the smartest person in the room, or that I needed to be one that had the answers in any given situation, and that's not the case. You know, Hylke, you said it beautifully before. It's about how can we seek to serve in every given scenario. And, you know, I view listening as really kind of the secret weapon of influence, because if you're present and you're there, people feel heard, even if things don't go exactly the way they claim to want. It is a very powerful foundation of trust that you can build if you start with listening and taking other people's perspectives into consideration. And I have a question for you, because one of the concepts I know that you talk about is about magnetic listening. I'd love to get a feel for when you started to really realize how critical listening was and why it's more powerful than speaking.
Yes, I would say as powerful as speaking, and that includes listening to within myself. Right? So you could say our survival brain wants to always now fix, have the answer, be the smart one, be the rescuer, check out, blame, or do something.
Yeah.
And wisdom in our current state of evolution isn't autopilot. It's like we need to kind of wean ourselves off our addiction of immediacy. Even though some things are immediate, like when I'm in traffic, I need to switch. Yeah, but allow ourselves that space of going deeper. And when we do that, there is a magnet. It's magnetizing, because we are getting magnetized to go deeper. Like when I go deeper, or when you go deeper, I'll also go deeper. Like, because we start to tune in with each other at a deeper level, and that magnetizes for us to speak more from a deeper place. And speaking from a deeper place, like when I have a conflict with somebody or a disagreement, at the very surface level, it might be like the example I just gave. Hylke, you F this up. Okay. At some level, that was true. And there was a deeper level. Like, what was the impact of that? What did I do? How did you feel about that? Why did I do that? And listening deeply with that person, for example, helped this person to magnetize beyond their anger into saying what they really needed, which was to be seen in the meeting and for the meeting to be in balance. And it magnetized me to get closer to my motivation for why I had been reactive, which was I was feeling insecure. Like that, right? So, but I being able by so we have a very different conversation, because when I say, "Oh, I felt insecure," and the other person said, "I would like to be seen," is very different from, "Hylke, you after up the meeting, I didn't have airtime." Like a very different conversation. That's how listening magnetizes. The other thing about that is one of the things I think we as humans are most afraid of is our aloneness. Standing by ourselves. Nobody sees the world the way I do. And in some ways, nobody will see the world exactly the way we see, because we're unique perspectives. And yet there's a deep longing and yearning in us to be seen, to not be alone. And so when we listen, it's an act of service, because we let the person know that they're not alone. And when we're trying to fix them, that's more like, here, your problem, go fix it, which reinforces the sense of aloneness. So, Carson, if you think about that, because I've seen that with you, you actually are a magnetic and magnetizing listener. How do you apply that with your teams and in your family?
Yeah, no, thanks for that perspective. I think often, and as again, this is an evolution for me, because I've often felt a compulsion to, to whether it's to be seen or, to fix or to diagnose, or that expectation that frankly I've conjured up for myself, to go in and judge the situation or get the last word in. And, over time, realizing that challenge comes from within. It's not from any external factor. We talked about that on a prior show, about that rush to judgment often. Why are we judging, and what is it about our own challenge or insecurity or defensiveness that's causing us to show up in that way? But when I think about, magnetic listening, it's really that art of drawing others out and doing so in a very respectful way that elevates them. One thing that I've realized in my time as a leader is the more that you can elevate others and to find ways for them to not only hone their own unique superpowers and passions, but also to leverage them in a way that elevates everyone around them, we all win. And it's important to point it out like that, because I've seen a lot of management structures that are very rigid. Things have to be a certain way. They have to be exactly by the book. We've got to follow this exact process. I've actually seen the opposite work very well, is when everyone is kind of seen and recognized for their own unique contributions. That's exceptionally important. Everybody's going to have a perspective and an opinion. Now, some people aren't going to voice them. I think that's why it's all the more important that I spend time not only in group settings, but also one-to-one with people on my team, because I need to understand what makes this person tick. What are some of the ideas that they have? If maybe they were in my shoes or wanted to, make changes, or what did they deem would be most impactful? If I were able to remove barriers for them. I often encourage my team to have what I like to call players only conversations, where it's remove me from the equation, meet together with, your fellow individual contributors and share, gel, vent, whatever you need to do. But where I've seen a lot of power here, Hylke, is when they can express to me maybe those 5 things on their wish list that they would love to see different in our organization. I may not be able to change all 5 of them, but if I can even show progress on 3 or 4, it is of immense value. And it shows the team that, we're not just hearing them, but it shows them that they are heard. We want them to feel heard. We want them to walk away from these conversations thinking that, that they're experiencing this and they're part of the journey, not just that it's happening to them. I think that's where trust is really born. And that's where I've seen listening almost be like that emotional excavation where, the better you get at it, the more that somebody is going to actually reveal their true feelings and passion. You're earning that right to be trusted in their eyes.
That sense of I'm listening, you earn trust. And I also hear like there's this sense of elevating. And this is not propping up with advice or any of that, but having the person find their deeper answer, their truer perspective, and that creates energy and strength. And that's not something you can tell them. It's something that happens because you're listening. We're going to take a short break. After the break, I'd like to explore more, Carson, why are we not listening? Why are we not listening? What keeps us from?
You are listening to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Do you want to learn more about building the next level of connectedness in your team? Please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
Carson and I have been talking about magnetic listening and listening that elevates. And, if I ask anybody and say, hey, do you think listening more is a good idea? Most people, not everyone. I know some people that would say no, but most people would say yes, intuitively no, we know. And yet we don't. So why is that? So Carson, tell us a bit about why do you sometimes not listen? What happens?
It's challenging to put into practical application. And you touched on this earlier, Hylke, when you talked about seeing conflict as confluence. I'll give you a great example. In recent times, there have been some changes in my organization and new leaders that I've been privileged to work with and collaborate with. And with each of these situations comes, different experiences, different perspectives, years of experience doing things differently in different realm, but toward, driving towards similar outcomes. And you're not always going to see eye to eye. You're going to come with your own skills and your own perspectives and your own experience. And with that experience comes wisdom, ideally, and that ability to sometimes realize like, hey, if I'm looking at a set of circumstances, I've been here before. I think I have an ability to make an educated decision on how to proceed with this set of variables. The other person that you work with, they may think the exact same thing, and it doesn't make either one of you wrong. And I think that's where the challenge is we can't show up to these conversations feeling threatened because someone else may have a strong opinion, because someone else wants to move at a speed that is different than yours. And these types of situations, they still, they happen. I mean, Hylke and I have been doing this for a long time, right? And these are situations that still happen in our everyday experiences and lives. Hylke shared an experience that happened not long ago. I am, working on a project with other people who have different perspectives and different experiences that lend perspective into what we're endeavoring to do. And it forces me to take a back seat sometimes where I feel every bit of confidence and ability to drive forward, but it's very critical that I plug in and I listen and I understand. I think about some of the large deals that I've negotiated. I think about some of the tense interactions with teams. I think it's a mindset shift here, Hylke. It's, not looking at, me against you. It's us against the issue. And yes, frankly, anytime that you have more than one person who has credibility and experience, it's better to have multiple people. And so, frankly, it's been getting over, myself and realizing that there are valid perspectives and opinions that can see blind spots that maybe I wouldn't be able to normally see. I'm really fascinated by this concept, Hylke, when we think about conflict as confluence. And you framed this up, kind of joining forces rather than opposing views. Tell me more about your experience here. And then frankly, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like if somebody doesn't want to meet us on that same side of the table? How do we stay grounded and not take it personally and maybe learn from these experiences?
Yeah, conflict is confluence, and we do not control the other person. So to me, that's part of this is letting go of my sense of urgency. Because if I believe that we need to see exactly the same thing within the next 5 minutes or within the next hour, the other person will feel that. So there's a quality of coercion in there, not listening. Yet when I go in totally open and saying, I honestly don't know where we'll land. And my intention is to listen deeply and to be also deeply honest with you. Over time, the other person, and I've had experiences where that took years, the other person will, so that something happens with human beings. Sometimes it takes generations, but this is like the ego wants it now. And now in our corporate context, what I just said is totally impractical, because I got to figure out what's next. I got things to do, got targets to make, and that's true too. Even in those situations when I just uh, commit myself to listening deeply, there's something about that energy that is infectious. And I can even frame it and say, hey, I see that you are thinking X and I'm thinking Y. Do you agree we have a conflict? Yes, we make a little micro agreement because in this moment we acknowledge that we're seeing things differently. And then we can put that on the table, not as you against me, but more like here's these different things on the table. What do we do with that? And that brings awareness together. Like that creates a common view of, well, there's a conflict. Not you are in conflict with me. No, we are looking at our conflict together. And interestingly enough, most humans, just like when they watch a soap series, like I just finished the last episode of Shrinking last night, right? And there's such a relief when things come together. There's an innate drive in humans for harmony. Like when something is out of tune, or like there's a spot on the wall, or like we want the things to get back to harmony. So when we are looking with two people at conflict, after we're able to disarm all the you're wrong, it's your fault, la 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 la, our innate, I think, wisdom and for harmony comes up. There's one last thing I'd like to say about that in terms of not listening. There's a point in me I've noticed where I stop listening. And most people have that point. And it often has something to do with the other person hitting something, has hit something in me that is non-negotiable. That's almost like a fundamentalist belief, right? So, for example, if somebody said to me, meditation is the biggest bullshit in the world, I'd have to really go to, okay, tell me more, right? Because so much of me is invested in that not being true. So that's another tool to be aware of. What is your point of not listening? And what would happen, even if it's uncomfortable, if you still kept an open mind? So my question to you, Carson, is what happens with you when you reach that point of, I can't listen?
Yeah. Wow. That's an amazing question. It's interesting because as we develop our own beliefs about what is required for success or what really matters in the grand scheme of things, a lot of what happens around us becomes noise. I mean, I can't tell you how many calls I've been on with what I like to call the talking heads. You've got senior leadership on, and then there's a lot of these look at me's on the call. Like, They show up, they want to be seen, they have to share their perspective. And don't get me wrong, it sounds smart and it's great. But at the end of the day, we have to go out and we've got to execute. And it's one thing to talk, and then it's something entirely different to go out and walk the talk and execute. And, I think that's why as leaders, and we have this mantra in Microsoft leadership called model, coach, care. I benefited greatly from, being in an individual contributor role for several years before I took the mantle of leader. And I had credibility with my team because they had seen me do what they did. I understood their plight. I worked diligently to try to make sure that they knew a lot of the things that I wish I had known when I was in their role. I worked to champion them and to advocate for them. And so that moment when it becomes hard for me to listen, it's when I see a lot of those that maybe haven't reached that point of really understanding what matters. It isn't about being seen. It's more about how can I go out and better collaborate and work with my team and better serve. And so when I hear things that are outside of that realm, it almost sounds like, it reminds me of the old Peanuts movies where it's like, wah, wah, wah. It just, I can't, it's very challenging to stay in that moment and in that conversation because I've already been lost. When it's, a lot of posturing and a lot of hypothetical questions being asked that have no real practical basis in reality, those types of things make me check out real quick and start thinking about, okay, what really needs to be done? What should I be doing right now to serve and support my people? Those types of things are very challenging for me because, and I understand why people do it, but I think often it comes from the antithesis of what we've been talking about the entire time. It's why people feel that urge and that need to be seen and be the smartest person in the room, when in reality, we should be seeking to understand others better.
And it's so interesting. So here's a situation where people are not in listening mode around us. And then the choice that I believe we have is to listen anyway. And maybe not to say that that's the answer, but to ask, like, what is really going on, and can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So we're getting towards the final minutes of this episode, Carson. How can you transform in a situation like that?
The most challenging things to do are challenging for a reason, but they have tremendous payoff. And so, like many things, Hylke, this is really about developing that new muscle and that new muscle memory. It's courageous to listen when your ego or your compulsions want to defend, or your brain wants to react in a situation. Leadership isn't easy. It is challenging for a reason. And so, making sure that, we've all had those situations where maybe things have transpired that we don't understand or we don't agree with, or whatever the case may be. How we show up in those moments matters. And showing up seeking to understand and seeking to listen instead of reacting is what will help us not only develop that as muscle memory, but also lead better in those situations. When I listen well, I lead better, period. And when I share openly, and when I'm more vulnerable with my team, making sure that they understand that I know that I don't have all the answers, nor do I purport to have all the answers, but I'm willing to go out there and get the answers with them. That's when I serve more powerfully. And that's frankly what connected teamwork is all about. We are still all just people, ideally rowing the same boat at the same time. We just happen to be sitting in the front, or we happen to be making suggestions and supporting the team in different ways. It's not necessarily about moving fast either, as we've explored today. It's about moving together. And that's what listening helps us do.
Thank you. I love that metaphor of the rowboat. I'm imagining all 8 billion plus people in this world. They're all this big rowboat. And part of that is humility and listening to ourselves and each other, figuring out what is in tune, what is needed right now. So maybe if you're listening today, think about a situation where you might just enjoy listening a little bit more, even if it's harder. Seeing it as an act of service, seeing it as an act of leadership to do that, and then just be curious about what happens. We might surprise ourselves, and I include myself in those that might be surprised. What happens when we actually listen just a little bit more? Thank you all for listening. If you're listening and liking this podcast, you can subscribe to Connected Teamwork Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and everybody else that the podcasts are. And of course, it's on LinkedIn. You've been here with Carson, Heady, and Hylke Faber. It's been a pleasure to be with you. And see you next time at the Connected Teamwork Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Take a moment to reflect on what you learned today that can help build your team. Also, if you like, think about one of your team members and what you appreciate about them. Let them know. Enjoy connecting more deeply to what is great about them. And see you next time at the Connected Teamwork Podcast.